And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure this evening to welcome you. I'm Paul Urt. I'm wearing two hats tonight as Director of the Faraday Institute and also Chair of Christians in Science. So this is a joint venture between Christians in Science and the Faraday Institute and this public lecture. Unfortunately, I have to begin with something boring and talk about toilets. And that is to tell you that they are on the floor below, so if you need to, please make your way out and down one flight of stairs and you'll find the toilets and facilities there. The other thing I need to tell you about is that we have no fire alarm test planned for this evening, so if you do hear it going off, it's probably the real thing, in which case please make an orderly exit through the fire escape at the front here or through the back and down the stairs. So with those housekeeping duties out of the way, let me move to the pleasurable part of the evening, which is, first of all, to welcome you all here. It's a pleasure to see you, and to those of you who will be watching this online. It's my special pleasure to welcome a fellow physicist tonight to give our lecture, Professor Tom McLeish, and in a sense to welcome him back here to Emmanuel College, where he was an undergraduate and then a postgraduate and then a research fellow. So he's coming home this evening, and it's a joy for us to welcome you here. Professor McLeish is currently the Chair of Natural Philosophy at the University of York, having previously been the Professor in the Durham University Department of Physics. He's had a very distinguished career, recognised by several prestigious medals in his research field, and actually I don't have time to list them all. Please don't. Except to mention, of course, he was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. And while he was at Durham, he was director of the Durham Centre for Soft Matter, a multidisciplinary team that works across physics, chemistry, mathematics, and engineering. And his interest in multidisciplinary studies, of course, is well exemplified also by his historical scholarship in medieval studies. And he's now really well known in the field of science and religion through his books, such as The Poetry and Music of Science, Comparing Creativity in Science and Art, and also Faith and Wisdom in Science. So he was, in 2018, actually awarded the Lanfranc Award for Education and Scholarship by the Archbishop of Canterbury, recognising his work for his record as one of the most outstanding scientists of his generation and the leading contemporary lay Anglican voice in the dialogue of science and faith. So he's undoubtedly very well qualified to speak to us on the subject tonight of science, religion and aesthetics that will draw upon some recent research funded by the Templeton Foundation. And his lecture tonight is entitled Science, Beauty, Theology, a Virtuous or Vicious Trinity. Professor McLeish.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul, so much for those kind words and very kind, overkind welcome. I should say those words are the words of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it is relatively easy for a scientist to convince an archbishop they are a leading scientific voice, blah, 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 I discovered. But thank you very much. That was very, very generous indeed. And it is lovely to be back at Emmanuel. I hope afterwards, before dinner, we might all have a chance to go and say hello to the ducks on the duck pond. And the Chinese plane tree, and maybe check out the only college with a Victorian open air school. Much beloved to the undergraduates. But anyway, we ought to get to business. This is also an unusual and lovely occasion for me. I think it's one of the few times I've been invited to speak and give the subject. I understand that the Faraday Institute are enjoying a wonderful series on aesthetics in science. But so thank you. It's always a little bit of a challenge, isn't it, when you can't just say, well, yes, I'll come along and I'll talk about I'll give you the latest version of the running talk. So this has really enjoyed it, and it dovetails in with some work I have been thinking about for a long, long time, ever since those Durham days, of also working across departments and across faculties. When I was briefly Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research there, people think that means going over to the dark side if you become a university administrator for a bit. I personally think it's something that everyone should have a go at. The generosity, I have to say, the generosity of humanities scholars and theologians included in talking to a crazy physicist or listening to a crazy physicist has been my uniform experience. I expected, just a little bit of understandable suspicion, but I can, to those people, my thanks are due as well. Right, let's just dive straight into beauty, which is not always a word used in science because we normally use the truth one. And I thought, we always look at Dirac, he's going to pop up at some point, isn't he? I gather that these lectures have been in the past at St. John's College, is that right? So, of course, this is also therefore a nod to the tradition of being hosted by St. John's, because Dirac was a fellow there, Nobel Prize winner, who really did say that, apparently, in a conversation with Einstein. And there are echoes of Dirac's emphasis on the importance of elegance and beauty in mathematical physics around today, as well as great criticisms of those echoes that we will treat. Of course, beauty requires the eye, a trained eye sometimes, to see. Not everyone is going to look at that tensor differential equation and see the breathtaking beauty of the step that Dirac made, which was to combine quantum mechanics of Schrödinger and Heisenberg with the relativity of Einstein. And for the first time, write a wave equation that was relativistically invariant, in other words, agreed with relativity, and showed that both the spin of the electron and antiparticles popped out unexpectedly. I think anyone who does that, and it might actually successfully predicted antiparticles, successfully retropredicted spin half. So, I think we can forgive a lot of over-aesthetics. Maybe we should also nod, when talking about beauty, and we should definitely to John Keats, whose famous, glorious Grecian ode finishes with those words: beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all you need to know. It is, of course, contested. This is the urn itself, finally speaking. Not quite sure that all of us have had experience of pots talking to us. And it's speaking, of course, of the frozen joys of distant centuries. Some other ingredient onto the future, onto the present. Some other ingredients, of course, this takes place partly because of and partly enjoying and resonating with the echoes of your last talk, this series, which Brandon, I believe, gave days ago. This extraordinary survey, also sponsored by Templeton Work and Wellbeing, which involved a broad survey of many thousands of interviews with many hundreds of scientists, among other questions, investigating their appreciation of use of aesthetics in science. A beautiful, elegant theory is more likely to be correct than a theory that is inelegant. Well, so the category there is, if you include the neutral category, neither agree or disagree, only a minority of scientists will disagree with that. And even more agree that mathematical beauty is a good indicator of scientific truth. So I'm not quite sure why even more say yes when you ask about mathematical beauty. But this is the sort of glorious head scratching these wonderful surveys throw up. Of course, only a minority in both cases completely agree, but it's a significant number. Professional scientists today work aesthetically and appreciate aesthetics. What does it mean to appreciate aesthetics? I'd like to just jump in, not straight away to mathematical science or any type of science, but into music. I came across this glorious piece of writing, and for me, it sums up the sublime aesthetic experiences. Simon Russell Beale, it's interdisciplinary, the great Shakespearean actor of our time, talking about music. Schubert can make time stand still in the last miraculous months of his life. He expanded the vision of what music could do. His most experimental work is a slow movement of his B-flat piano sonata, distills the process of music making the Hawaii progression, explores it, changes a note, explores again, breaks down a simple melody till the bones only are left, and the music is suspended. Play a pure sound. It gives us a glimpse of eternity. Wonderful writing. And if this does nothing else than send us all home into YouTube a recording of Steve Blackbridge's sonata, then I've probably done people a favour. But lest you wonder why this crazy professor of physics has had to go to a music appreciation to find expression of sublime, let's recall what Subrahim Chandrasekhar wrote as a theoretical cosmologist contemplating the mathematical structure of black holes. This shuddering before the beautiful, this incredible fact that a discovery motivated by a search after the beautiful in mathematics should find its exact replica in nature. Beauty is that to which the human mind responds at its deepest and most profound. It's true that Simon Russell Beale isn't actually mentioning beauty by name, but that is clearly what he's talking about, what's beyond beauty. The extraordinary backbone tingling experience Chandrasekhar is talking about is, know what I mean, is that extraordinary heart-stopping moment when it only happens once or twice in a lifetime, where the curve you calculated or the numbers you produced or the idea you've somehow crazily imagined from goodness knows where somehow shows up in the universe that we've observed. Get Carlos Friend to talk about that cosmic wave, microwave spectral background. He's talked about it hundreds of times, but it doesn't matter how many times you talk about that happening to yourself, you choke up every single time. This isn't just about an approximation. As far as we know, black holes, because of Stephen Hawking's no-hair theorem, really do only have mass, spin, and temperature. That's it. In other words, their mathematical description is an exact replica. It's a one-to-one mapping of these extraordinary, sublime and terrifying objects in nature that we saw the shadow of thanks to the Event Horizon telescope just a couple of years ago. However, your subject, ladies and gentlemen, you give me is not currently a uniformly agreed sublime one. That the most commonly agreed view on beauty I've managed to ascertain from the literature on the subject is that beauty has had a lifetime of contest and conflict. Let's jump straight into string theory. There is a massive war going on right now, and has increasingly been warming up over 3 decades, about whether my particle physicist colleagues have been so taken in, so hypnotized, transfixed by beauty, that they have taken wrong turn after wrong turn after wrong turn. For after string theory comes supersymmetry, comes goodness knows how many theories. We even build particle accelerators costing billions and billions of dollars on the promises from the theoreticians that this theory is so beautiful, these supersymmetric particles have to be discovered at the next energy level. And nothing has appeared. So here's Brian Greene reading string theory. Mental word comes close to the reality. How beautiful it would be were nature's particles rarely to be humming with the harmonies of the cosmos in supersymmetric violin strings beyond the level of microscopic resolution. But Sabine Hossenfeld has written this wonderful book called Lost in That. It's a bit of a rant, but it's a very well-written rant. Beauty is a treacherous guide, has led physicists astray many times before. The naturalness, the idea that all numbers should be of order 1. Sabine saying, well, why? Why should a fundamental grand unified theory of anything aesthetically appeal to us at all? Nature does what nature does. And yet Brian Greene steps into the shoes of Dirac, and he's a good guy. And So do about half, apparently, of our scientific colleagues. Back to Brandon and Christopher's wonderful survey. Even within science, aesthetics are conflicted. Did you drill down into the bar charts? I'm sorry, I was away in Norway during this talk, so I could that's another conference. It was on science and theology, so I hope you'll forgive me. Note that so the physicists are the darker red and the biologists the lighter shade. Note how the physicists prefer simplicity and the biologists complexity. Complexity looks more ugly, less beautiful, apparently, to someone like me, the survey tells me. But a life scientist rejoices in complexity and finds aesthetic pleasure there. This resonates with a contested history of science and beauty. Let's pan straight back and remind ourselves that in the 19th century, the Romantic movement not just criticise, but invade against science for boiling off, eviscerating the beauty and the wonder from the world. I could have quoted Keats or Blake. I thought we'd go with Poe tonight, sonnet to science, right? Science, thou daughter of old time, thou art, alterest all things by their peering eyes. Why preyest thou thus upon the poet's heart? Fulge, whose wings are dull realities, and like John Keats, who complained, you remember, about the unwoven rainbow and the denomed mind. Poe invades against science for ripping the ancient goddesses from their chariots in the sky, and from despiritualizing the woods of the forest, setting their hamadryads running and fleeing against the relentless force of reductionism and reason and experiment and observation. My job, said William Blake, is not to reason, but to imagine. That's the first terrible cut of the knife in the early Romantic movement, that deeply mistakenly, tragically divorced the work of imagination from the work of science, which we'll feel is tied up in what we're discussing later. And indeed, the work of the poet from the work of the scientist. And we'll have to revisit that before we finish as well. Who likes Mark Rothko's art? Oh, great. I absolutely love it. Who honestly can say now? Does there anything wrong with it? Oh, cows. Thanks. At least you'll admit it. Well, you're in good company with Roger Scruton. This work is a little more than a few rectangles of coordinated colours. Anyone who's not told the value of such art would find it difficult to identify with beauty. He thinks elsewhere in his very short introduction to beauty, Scruton calls Rothko's work a joke. But the Japanese-American Christian artist, Makoto Fujimura, who's written this extraordinary recent book after Art and Faith, get him to come and talk if he possibly can. It'd be wonderful for Faraday. As well as saying this about Rothko's work, writes in his book Art and Faith, for my friends and colleagues who come to me to complain that they don't understand or dislike Mark Rothko's work, all I tell them is to go back and spend longer in front of the creators. For Fujimura sees in Rothko's work something deeply and fundamentally for new creation. Personally, I can stand in front of them for as long as by God. They hum to me, and I don't know why. But I'd like to know one day. Symmetry. I promised some people here with symmetry, and here we are. Brian Reed again. I'm sorry, I'm not deliberately dissing Brian, but I mean, of course, one of the string theorists, and it is magnetic from mathematics. But I mean, what he It's only echoing Plotinus and Plato himself. There are thousands of years of reflection on symmetry being beautiful, a key part of aesthetics and a key part of physical truth. And behold, the glorious menagerie of particles that I got so excited by when I was a teenager and wanted to do physics. And here's the three-dimensional representation of a three-part hadron multiplet with the omega minus particle somewhere in one of those in the top. Symmetry led to beautiful predictions. The symmetry groups of abstract spaces, SU1, SU2, SU3, are the symmetry groups of the standard model that is our best mathematical grasp of reality at the highest energies and lowest length scales we've ever found so far. And it is beautiful. However, even Francis Bacon, who got us off on our current track on this, wasn't a great fan of perfect symmetry, nor was Leonardo. There's no excellent beauty that hath not some strange glory. There's a vast literature on the beauty of asymmetry, or of broken symmetry, or mildly broken symmetry. We had a wonderful workshop in the Institute of Advanced Studies in Durham when I was there, in McGilchrist. Confuse those two. Ian McGilchrist, a neurologist and literary scholar, came and spoke of the beautiful but radical asymmetry of the human brain. Most of our left brain, right brain trivia aren't right, of course, but there is a huge difference and complementarity of the brain. And so it's interesting that Kant, who probably wrote the longest, most extensive, most difficult to read, most nuanced treatise on aesthetics in the Third Critique, wrote that all stiff regularity has something in repugnant to taste. So we can't even agree about the beauty of symmetry. We can't agree about beauty and theology. These are rather long passages, so I apologise, but there's pieces to go to. It's interesting that Bolton has, and actually, I've taken this quote a little bit out of context, so I'm well aware that I can be pushed back on, as can David Bentley Hart, in criticising Bolton for being completely anesthetic. However, beauty for Bolton is not formative for the Christian faith. But again, just as what might go to Kant for philosophy, the theologian one goes to for aesthetics of beauty is Cantor's for Balthasar. His 7-volume work, The Glory of the Lord. He had a kite. And for Balthasar, we're beginning to be pushed towards the transcendent. Visible form, for a start, he talks in Platonic terms, but then starts talking about invisible, unfathomable mysteries, to which this thing called beauty points. And I'm beginning to wonder whether this is helping us with an experience we've all, even this evening, come across but haven't quite articulated yet, which is that we're not finding ourselves able to say what beauty is, but we all think we know it when we see it. And I wonder if that's because what we know, we think we know when we see it, is something that the beautiful thing in front of us is pointing to, rather than the thing itself. Whoever is not illuminated by this form of beauty will sees no light in the content either. And while we're getting theological, beauty is even contested in its very rare, very special forms in the new instances in the New Testament. Now, kalos is not an uncommon Greek word in the Gospels and the Epistles, but it is not frequently appropriate to treat it as beautiful. It's usually treated as good, fitting, appropriate, done a good thing, done a wise thing. But there's one case where all the translations, in context, nearly all translated as beauty, and it's Mary or whichever woman it was, in all the Gospels that are called this, who anoint Jesus' body, expensive blood, before his passion. And you'll remember, they all thought it was ugly, disgusting, inappropriate, wasteful thing to do. Poorly. Could have been sold. Money given to the poor. That would have been much more beautiful than tipping it over this filthy floor and catching Jesus on the way. But what did Christ? He said, this woman has done a beautiful thing. What is more? He said that wherever this kerygma, wherever this gospel, this evangelion is preached, this act will be preached as well. This will be remembered. So beauty accompanies this extraordinary creative act, which Fujimon identifies as the biblical work of art. His book, Art and Faith, is woven through with this New Testamental beautiful, beautiful act. And note how material and physical this beautiful act is. Note how the phases of solid, liquid, and gas permeate through the story. It's the most sacramental, it vies for the Last Supper, doesn't it? As the most multi-sensual sacramental of the New Testament. Well, I said to Hassel at the moment, we have to just do a little revision, actually, just to summarize our instances of beauty. I mean, so this is a 2-minute undergraduate aesthetics course on who said what about beauty, and this is the most appalling slide, and I apologise to everyone here who actually knows stuff about this. But just to illustrate how lengthy, complex, and tortuous talk of beauty has been through the ages, this is a 4-dimensional hypercube. Because I had to keep writing axes. You see, we have to ask, look, is beauty, the first thing we ask, is beauty subjective or objective? Is it just what I feel? Is it all happening in me? After all, well, this is beauty. No, I want this thing to be beautiful. Symmetry, this equilateral triangle, these platonic solids are beautiful, objective. Is beauty, is beauty for use, like an art house? No, that's just being instrumental. It should be disinterested. We should stand back. Should beauty arise the passions, or should it be a rationally debatable thing? Or do passions get in the way through the aesthetic judgment? Or rational, or is it just socially constructed? It's constructed because the sociologists have just as much time with beauty as a social construct as they've had in recent years with science as a social construct. Well, Plato, definitely out there in terms of objective, but interestingly, already nuanced, not objective reality. His beauty is, of course, in the forms. Goodness knows where they are. Plotinus, Neoplatonist, late antiquity, unification. Beauty is that which brings together disparate ideas under a single notion. David Hume, you see what I mean? How important to try and summarise people like this in a single sentence. But I suppose he was socially constructed in the sense that Hume recognised the problems of identifying what beauty is and decided to knock that up a level to the good aesthetic judge. You know all that stuff. Schiller and the great century German idealism talked about the playfulness, the disinterestedness of beauty. It should not be instrumental. I wonder where to put Kant. I decided I have to put him in the middle because he compromises himself on all of these 4 dimensions. But I mean, what else can you do? There's Hegel pointing to the transcendent. Beauty is that which bridges matter and spirit. Salvatore Croce talks of affective representations, so begins to explore ways, as Kant did, of being rational about subjectivity. So it's interesting that beauty itself has been active in all this philosophical space of making us think again about those qualities we thought were opposites, but aren't necessarily opposites. I don't know how many. Our own century of science, chemists have written beautifully about philosophy of science, Michael Polanyi. Theoretical form, you see. But as a result of this, in the 20th century, we have to recognise beauty has had a very, very rough ride. People talk about the flight from beauty. That's why urinals are displayed as works of art. That's why a canvas covered in matte black is a work of art. Some people would say that's why a 12-tone row is a work of art. I would entirely agree, but no one can agree whether this is art or not. And why has beauty slipped into dispute in art? Be there and say in the century that started with World War III, the recognition that those with a refined aesthetic sense, only amplified one world war later, can nonetheless unleash the most inhuman of atrocities, began to undermine the connection between beauty and truth and goodness. The fact that it could be analysed. They'd be hard to suggest that even Edmund Burke's invention, observation, creation of the sublime as the terrifying arch beauty also contributed, therefore, to the marginalisation and peripheralisation of beauty itself. And, of course, the dominance of an interpretation of science as entirely reductionist and rationalistic follows suit. There is no room in science for beauty and let's say, many voices. And yet, those who practice and encounter the world through their mathematics and science have never stopped speaking in aesthetic terms. Ada Lovelace's Fair White Wings of Imagination, those who saw on Fair White Wings of Imagination, I'm very delighted that York University has called my post, as in old times, natural philosophy. When I saw this from Ada Lovelace, I wondered if I missed a trick and should have called it the professor of those who saw on Fair White Wings of Imagination, because that's what Ada Lovelace wanted to call natural scientists, you see. Richard Feynman, gritty Manhattan Project, fancy physicist, Nobel Prize winner that he was, found himself talking about science as a reliever of beauty at many orders of scale in the flowers in the cell. Einstein was famously reminded people over and again how important imagination is, and aesthetically informed imagination in science. And some of you, I apologise for seeing this before, but the project I've been involved with in this work of comparative creativity between arts and sciences that led to the Theology, Music and Science shocked me and surprised me. What I did in my research was to get chemists, physicists, and mathematicians and engineers to sit down with me, usually over a glass of wine, because they usually needed softening up a little bit for this, and to tell me the story of their favourite thing. I want all the wrong turns. I want the funny frustrations. I want the walks in the woods. Anything. And then I, as a controlled experiment, I did the same thing with composers and artists, poets, novelists, and painters. And then I thought I was going to get stories that I could categorise neatly into scientific capital, stories I could categorise neatly into artistic capital content. I kept hearing this story of initial vision, which gave rise to a desire to achieve it, whether it's a poem or a picture or a formula or a theorem, continuous straining for the first time, the weightlifting Olympic, the continuous experience of constraint and failure as part and parcel of our creative process that we need to be far more honest about, particularly for the mental health of early career artists, by the way. And then this experience of desert moments when we've given enough on it all, and there's a spontaneous upwelling, as if from the muse, of an idea that might just work. So this story, the reason I want to tell you this again today, is because I wanted us to notice the aesthetic and emotional content, which is impossible to disentangle from the cognitive and logical scientific process. if we're honest. And the final result also results in aesthetic emotional response. So I'm going to steer towards touchdown. I'm steer towards choosing a particular art form, and I want to choose that of poetry. Not only because there's an expert at this college in the audience on poetry science who's written an essay on it, but because the division between poetry and science in the early 19th century, which had already come to the ears of Goethe, is I think a touchstone, a bellwether, and a pointer to our problems about beauty and our potential goals and wins. Nowhere, says Goethe in his Theology, that grant that science and poetry could be united. They forgot that science arose from poetry, and failed to see that the change of times might beneficially reunite the two as friends. How, my friends, could it be? Can you imagine a world in which science and poetry were really united? If you could, might that not be a world in which we had overcome these tortuous disagreements about beauty and aesthetics and turned them into an honest and open, fully functional, creative scientific process that also allowed, in our fragmented and broken universities, the humanities and sciences to talk to each other in really creative and respectful terms. Wordsworth said the same thing in the Lyrical Ballads, that time would come when the poet's art would draw from this wonderful science. And I wonder if the time has come. What was happening with the book of Sonnet to Science? Poets like Mary Peeler spending time with physicists and writing a wonderful anthology, Quantum Heresies. John Turney's now 20 years old anthology of science works. Perhaps ultimately, whatever else, formerly this parish, fabulous poetry written by an astronomer, much very lamented. And there's now a new journal called Consilience, which Sam has launched. It's free. Go and Google that one as well on science poetry. And both scientists and poets write for it. Something is going on that reminds us that something like this used to go on way back in the 17th century when the experimental method was getting going. And people like Margaret Cavendish were very cleverly saying experiments will never work and giving us very good reasons for why that we have forgotten. It's obvious experiments do. We need theology to show very well. And writing extremely imaginative poetry about atoms that give rise to novel ideas on atomic structure. I can find no instance of hollow atoms before Margaret Cavendish's 1653, is it? Yes, poem on hollow atoms that give air. That now present what we think about the rightness or wrongness of hollow atoms. So there are wonderful hollow polymer molecules now. It's neither here nor there. It's the scientific imagination. And Sam Coleridge put his finger on it. The most scientific of the romantics and the most theological after he got done with drugs. And he found faith. He wrote this fabulous in biography. Quoted says, but can you see where this is going? The primary imagination I hold with the living power and prime agent of human perception, which includes poetic and scientific perception, and as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. That's a profoundly theological statement, Coleridge is speaking here, that in Imago Dei means that we are little I ams made in image of the I am. This is his burning bush moment. Picked up by one, read him very much, George MacDonald, mentor and huge influencer of all of fantasy literature, in particular J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who thought George MacDonald's works were the best out there. That's where the wardrobe comes from. But also comes Now, it's nice because there's a thing called the George MacDonald Science Society, who's believed until recently that MacDonald inveighed against some was very, very suspicious about science. He wasn't at all. And he actually lectured on science. He taught chemistry. And what he didn't think was good was a science that had self-divorce and self-imagination. We yield you your facts, of course, but the limits be claimed for the prophetic imagination. What he's saying is there is no method for imagining hypotheses. Because we know that anything we might call science is what you do with your hypothesis when you have it. So the poesis of science, we've been using it all along. We still talk about it. So it's Fujimura, again, on the sacred role of creativity. His book is a testament of a Christian and an artist who wants to know what his art is for within the kingdom of God. Because the reason I recognise, those who read my little, scrappy book, Faithfulness and Science, is because I had to write that book because I wanted to know what my vocation as a scientist was for within the kingdom of God. It's not the how do you reconcile science and faith thing, it's how do I science. And the sacred role of creativity in theology, says, you see, is part of the new creation. What Fujimura says is that part of God's process of creating little bubbles of new creation in this creation, which the first earnest was the resurrection, and the second earnest was the Holy Spirit. It's the ability of the Imago Dei to create an image of God. Because everything he says about art, my smile, he's not talking about science, but my smile goes wider and wider, because under the theological frame, everything you can say about art, you can also say about science. And I just thought I'd echo one of his sentences about that anointing by Mary of Jesus. He spots with his artistic eye. He says that aroma is still around Christ's body as he hangs on the cross. And he identifies Mary's act as a beautiful, artistic act of the most wondrous creativity and signifying. So, being created co-creators, Benjamin is the theme and ended up on. As a doorway through which we might understand beauty, lives and generates worlds, because there's a wager. Because we see in a glass darkly, and because there is this project of healing and resolving one of the many broken relationships that our fall has left with us. That broken relationship between humans and the material natural world. But that also needs to be healed. George Steiner says that is what art is for. And Arendt said the same thing. And under that healing, reconciling teleology, both art and science, I say, well, have a role to play. And if you think about what poetry is with this thought, if poetry is the creative confluence of the imagination spoiled by emotions and powered by spirit, but turned into something beautiful by the constraint of form, as Leonardo would have it, or as Stravinsky would have it. The paradox of the artist knows that constraints are that which give the artist freedom to create. What, I wonder, could call on the greater power of imagination than the call to reimagine the whole universe? But that's apparently what we're asked to do as scientists, right? And what could constitute the greater form in which to conform that imaginative explosion than the universe in which we live as we observe it? Science as a poetic act, science as poesis. Perhaps you buy it, perhaps you don't. We'll discuss. So, to conclude, I'd like to suggest that science is a creative act, right at the heart of Christian theology of Imago Dei. For if God creates a world, might not one of the vocations of the image of God be to create an image of that world as part of the project in which God sweeps us up? That project isn't arbitrary, aleatory, it's restorative, it's participative, it's deeply imaginative. And it participates and it perceives beauty, but in a glass darkly, that act of the woman pouring the perfume on Jesus, that beauty wasn't seen by most of the people there, only by Jesus. Why? Because he was the only one in the room who could see that that act belonged in its fullness in the new creation. This one. It was a point to the resurrection and the fragrance of this entirely new order of creation, but it was a creative creation. So maybe that is why it isn't definable, or isn't a category, because it belongs to the new creation. So there, we're going to keep misunderstanding the relationship between beauty and truth. It's going to be part of our seeing through dark glasses in this dark world. But we are called nonetheless to perceive, to keep looking, and as Soldatas are reminding us, to keep understanding the theological infinity of beauty so that we can see well, and so that we can serve the new creation well. And both art and science together, participation, might be able to reveal the truly beautiful, as we all create together in image. Thank you so much for inviting me to think about this.
So thank you very much indeed, Tom, for an absolutely wonderfully inspiring lecture. And I've been a physicist all my life, and just in the last 40 minutes I've discovered why. Oh. Thank you. Actually,
nice man.
I'm going to ask for questions from the audience, but I'm going to claim the chairman's privilege and ask the first one, because actually, in a sense, you answered it for me as you came towards the end, but I was worried initially when you started off with Dirac's statement that the beauty had to be in the equations. And I asked this question of your colleague Brandon, and I did Nathan as well, but I put it this way. If we take, for example, Maxwell's equations that links electricity and magnetism, and the way we write them down today in terms of vector operators are beautiful, 4 simple equations. But if you write them down in Cartesian coordinates and CGS units, they're a real mess. They don't look beautiful at all. So the question is the beauty in the representation? Or is the beauty when we find a way of representing some beauty in the laws themselves? And so the beauty is not in the equation, but what they can reveal and point to, and sort of picks up the Balthasar principle, and that somehow it points us and helps us resonate with the image of godliness, that we begin to see something beautiful that God made for his own pleasure, that it gives us pleasure when we realize it. And it's the underlying laws that are beautiful, not the representation.
That's a really wonderful question. Of course, you can write even more succinctly. You know, the stress energy tensor represent. Of course, you do. I mean, you don't even write the 4 equation. You just say that the 4 divergence of the stress energy tensor is 0. That's pretty cool. Then it needs 3 symbols. Sorry. But you know, I mean, literally it's condenses down to nothing. But of course, once you've done that, of course, the representation, it has to be meaningful. I think Richard Feynman has a wonderful rhetorical device here, I think in the lectures of physics, warning against artificial simple representations. Because I can write the laws of the entire space-time history very simply. I'll do it now. He writes U equals 0. And U is the unphysicalness. And so what U is, it's the sum of it's the sum of all the variables of the universe and all the laws minus the real minus what they squared. It's like a chi-square sum. And of course it's meaningless. I mean, it's obviously, well, obviously, I don't know what it means. But you're quite right, of course, that the marks on the page are, when it comes to physics, mathematical physics, are by no means beautiful. I think the beauty is responded to those who know how to read them. And of course, the same is true of works of art. The same is true of pieces of music. Famously, Stravinsky's first performance of Rite of Spring. I think the first performance of Beethoven's Ninth, or one of those, at least, caused a riot of complaints that this was cacophony. So we communally have to learn to perceive beauty. And of course, the fact that beauty can, and aesthetic beauty can be learned, is of course part of David Hume's insight to beauty. But then, of course, that begs another question, which is, okay, but given that the firing of our neurons is itself a representation of our thought, at some level what we have is representation. So I come back to say, well, what is representation? We don't have access to the world. This is me as a critical realist verging on the idealist end of that spectrum. We aren't in contact with the world. We are only in contact with our ideas of the world, and those are representations. So in the end, one has to find beauty in representation, which is why I think beauty participates as a sign.
Okay. Now it's someone else's turn to ask a question. We have one at the back there, and I think there's a microphone going to go to you so that everyone can hear you.
Thank you. I would like to ask, in which way does beauty then tie into epistemology in so far that it may represent a sort of precondition to even conceive of some sort of truth as a totality, the way perhaps Kant described it? As, for example, your example with the Maxwell's equations, you could also write them down in differential forms and have df equals 0 in just one line. So, like, I don't really see how the beauty lies in the particular formulation of the formula, but maybe in the kind of perception, the epistemology of finding the initial encounter of finding that.
Okay, so I think the answer is this. I think it's a mark. So one can overstep the mark. I'm more with Sabine Hosfeld than I am with Paul Dirac on beauty being a guarantor of truth. I think we know it isn't. I mean, actually, there are wonderful grand theories of everything. It would be lovely to be true. And they've already been knocked out of the ballpark by excluding supersymmetry from non-hadron collider observations, for example. However, the reason we get hung up about, well, therefore there can be no epistemological guide rail called beauty, is because we've forgotten that the first and possibly the most greatest and more significant part of the scientific process is the part of imagination. It's the divergent part of imagining what could be the case. We cannot read nature off of our observations. We cannot deduce the laws of physics from nature. We can only induce those. And that is a profound act of creativity. It is, in fact, creating a little image universe. Now, we need help doing that. We need all the help we can get. And if an aesthetic response provides us that epistemological pathway, and beauty is part of that, then I'm for beauty. Now, we see through a glass darkly. It won't guarantee us that the end of the road, that first road we choose, leads to truth, but it will get us on the road. Now, I could take this even further and quote Hadamard, the French mathematician who wrote one book around about on the role of imagination in mathematics, and he actually did a calculation. He thought, he was fascinated by this common experience of the mathematical thinkers. Indeed, all of us, of wrestling with stuff and then getting nowhere, and then suddenly, waking up in the morning and I can prove the theorem. Actually, his experience was proving anti-theorem, and his subconscious had been working with mind. And he said, well, maybe this subconscious knows mathematics, not my subconscious. And he worked out. First of all, said, well, maybe the subconscious mind is a machine. He goes through all the possible symbolic manipulations there could be, and then he soon realized it's a hyperastronomical number. He could never have done that. He then alights on the fact that even the subconscious mind has some sort of subconscious version of the aesthetic that guides it on something that might be worth trying. So there's an example of the.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Another question, just in the front row here, second row.
Thank you very much for your lecture. So that road helped to find aesthetic beauty of Dirac, you can say, for Heisenberg, father of quantum physics, I guess we can say one of them. His road took him to India. One of the fathers of the atomic model, Father Niels Bohr, the road took him to China. And it seemed like it's certainly not determinism or mechanics they found, some sort of poetry, representation of their theories that they came back. So is it possible that some of these fathers sometimes reminds us that we have to find this road to beauty from an unexpected source, and in this case from the East?
Yeah, it's a great question. I should say, with a professor of history of science in the front row, that I'm sure we speak for Hasselt squirming around, that we are trying to move away from this narrative of fathers of chemistry, fathers of quantum mechanics, for two reasons. If you don't mind, because one is the genderness of it, which is not appropriate, and also it's allowed me to say that, which I haven't stressed sufficiently tonight, that science is not an individual business. There are individual little places where the ideas pop out, but it's always done in community. It's always there are multiple people who create ideas, who and I've even had experiences where a full idea has emerged from a conversation with a scientist in which has involved pure misunderstandings. Daniel, that's a wonderful idea. That's what's going to do it. I didn't say that. No, I think there's other thing. No, I thought you said, oh, no, that is a much better idea. And so who came up with the idea? The answer, no one. It was it. Work. So the other thing, of course, is that you quite rightly said that science is and always has been and can be deeply contemplative. And of course, it doesn't just afterwards, when inventing, anyone that's more or less invented quantum mechanics would have to go and breathe deeply up a mountain for many years. I mean, wouldn't they? I mean, not surprised. Just try and think about what they've done and how it is that they've managed to do it. I actually think that, so two things to say here. One is that scientists do inherit very much in terms of methodology from all tradition, and there are contemplative practices that we should be encouraging our research students and stocks to involve. I mean, again, part of this project, I'm sorry, I'm taking your question in different directions, I hope you forgive me. It's a very fruitful question. Part of this project on creativity in science, after a while I reflected, wait a minute, this is important stuff. This is important stuff. It is very, very important to be as creative as scientists as we can be. Of course, it's important to be able to, do the maths properly and to clean the test tube and all that. But having the ideas is what really counts. And then I thought, in my own formation here in Cambridge, the Cavendish Laboratory in the 1980s, were those little of aspiring scientists, another group, everyone taking the science. For so much as one afternoon for a discussion on how what life practices might lend to more creative science. You can guess the answer. But I think there's much to say here. Of course, Heisenberg's exhausted moment on Heligoland, when the penny dropped, that one could represent momentum as a matrix, as an operator, and what might happen. It was itself a moment he writes about this very revealing exhaustion. In the storm, it's really a Joban moment of a voice that speaks from the whirlwind. It is extraordinary. The other thing I should say, and I could have included this and should have done, this was not a very global presentation. Forgive me for so much for being very Western, but the Ruist tradition, so pre-Confucianism, not a proper, has a long tradition of meditation on nature that is recognizably scientific method, but recognizably part of the first half of the slide of reimagining science, and we have much to learn from different traditions.
So is there an aspect of the sort of East-West difference whereby in the West we tend to look at the external world in mechanical terms, it's made of bits and pieces, whereas the Eastern view is more organic and holistic, and that gives me a different perspective on how things work?
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing you're thinking of?
I'm not qualified to answer that, but that is as far as I know, that is my understanding as well.
It would certainly be a different way for us to think about things. Another question, we have time, perhaps one short question, just in front here. Short question and a short answer.
I suppose.
I wonder whether there's a risk sometimes of over-determining the concept of beauty in all this. There are links that we've explored between theology, aesthetics, and science, but is a concept of beauty being overworked? In theology, there's a good deal about sin, suffering, death. Crucifixion is not immediately something to which one would ascribe beauty. There's maybe a richer range of aesthetic concepts that need to be employed to describe the diverse functions of art. And that actually might help to make further connections with science. So it's the question really about beauty, whether it needs to be supplemented by a range of other aesthetic functions.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Some of those other categories of aesthetics are regularly employed in scientific discourse. Elegance immediately comes to mind. Symmetry itself. So there are other categories. There isn't, as far as I know, in science, it does nothing immediately. Small. People also sling mud at each other for arguing. Theories that are, quote, not even right. That was a paper one. Yes, on both positive and negative, so there is a richer vocabulary. I think I wanted to talk about beauty parliaments too, but also because, of course, once you start digging down into the literature, you find it's either overworked or it's opening up to cabins of riches that once we properly understand the word has and David you could in the Beauty of the Infinite you could accuse him of overworking beauty, but he goes further than us opening beauty up to what lies beyond beauty. In other words, so if beauty is a pointer to something which we cannot grasp now, but we have intuitions of, but which really belongs in the new creation, not in this one, then, that is characteristic of overworked theological phrases, because the theological signs you yourself referred to need to bear and have historically borne in almost intolerable Levitical discourse. But they have to do it, because we have no other tools. And we let them do it because we know they point to something much, much weightier. In fact, I think David refers to beauty as something that cannot, the weightiness, the only real solid stuff is that to which beauty points. That's where C.S. Lewis got it from. Scarlet image, but I suppose. So yes, and I'm thinking again in terms of learned beauty, long tradition of literature on how to read the blood dripping from a tortured man breathing his last on a Roman horrific instrument of execution as the most beautiful act in history. I mean, it's the greatest ever paradox. And so the paradox of seeing utter beauty in states of otherness is something that Christians need to walk with and live with. That's bearing too much weight, it's bearing too.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for coming, everyone. Just as you're leaving, way out, you're very welcome to browse and to purchase stuff there. But I think I speak on behalf of everyone here to say that I'm so glad we made you come and talk on this subject. And thank you for covering it so graciously and so wisely and for giving us so much more to think about, Tom. Thank you very much indeed.